She coaches, mentors, and educates mompreneurs, executive teams, healers, coaches, and consciously driven entrepreneurs with a blended approach in functional medicine health coaching, spiritual life coaching, divine healing, meditation, mindfulness, shadow work, and somatic breath to reprogram subconscious limiting beliefs and ego patterns that keep us stuck in fear or in dis-ease. Her previous corporate experience as an engineer and leadership in the military brings a magnetizing blend of soul and strategy. Her holistic approach builds a solid foundation through balanced well-being with compassionate, emotional empowerment and intuitive spiritual guidance. Her work around self-worth supports women to heal their relationships to the feminine, letting go of the hustle and overwhelm, and encourage the balance of flow and aligned action. She is also the host of the podcast, The Embodied Healing Self, creator of the North Star Collective and Embodied Healing Retreat. When she has time, Jen loves to travel, surf, windsurf, dance, yoga, and all forms of outdoor and adventurous activities. Jen also loves to travel, surf, windsurf, dance, yoga, and all forms of outdoor and adventurous activities. She currently resides in Northeast Florida with her 2 daughters, her puppy, and, of course, her husband, Chris, of 18 years. You are going to love everything that Jen has to offer on this week's episode. She is one of a kind. She is one of my go-to mentors when I am stuck or confused and just need to throw some ideas around. Like I said, she's a dear friend, and I cannot wait for all of you to get to know her and the great work that she does in this world. So relax and settle in because it's going to be a great episode. Here we go. Welcome, friends. Today on the Intuitive Mother podcast, we have a special guest, Jen Mons. She is from Northeast Florida. She is an intuitive healer, life purpose coach, mentor, wife, mother, of course, and she is a very dear soul and friend to myself. I have been excited to have her on here with us and just to have her tell us a little bit about her. And then, of course, I know that she is a very conscious mother, and I would love to have her share some of her insight into conscious mothering with all of you. So welcome, Jen. And like I said, if you could just tell our listeners a little bit about you, that would be great.
Yes, thank you so much for having me on the show. It's such a great honor. And, it's really been fun to I guess we're going into just a couple of years now connecting through a mastermind that we were in and then doing some work together. And it's been fun to just witness both the personal and professional growth, I guess, the journey that you've been on the past couple of years. So it feels really nice and complete to be able to come on the show and just talk about something that is so cherished to both of us, is the space that we hold and the value that we hold as a mother. And I know that that's something that has always come up in conversations. And so, yes, I am an intuitive coach. I have actually a background in which we'll probably get into. I have a former corporate career, former military graduate, engineer, turned holistic healer about 15 years ago with the birth of my first daughter, which was really, I like to call it my rebirth. And so a lot of the work that I do now is really helping women to discover their worth and standing in their soul purpose. I'm the creator of a technique called soul wisdom imprinting. And I also train intuitive life coaches as well and mentor healers and coaches. So I specifically work with women, and most of the women I work with are mothers. It just kind of turns out that way. And it's really, I find myself attracting women who are really looking to let go of all of those roles and identities and beliefs that we've had around our self-worth and sort of that overachieving and perfectionism that turns into overwhelm and busyness, which is just a distraction from what matters most, which is our family. So yeah, I'm all about the quality of life and freedom and finding joy and freedom in everything. And so it's really a lot of the work that I do. Yeah, I have my own podcast as well. And really, I just want to start by saying that, all of this, I really believe that I am in that phase of my life where it's coming to my soul essence, my being. It's like feeling more relaxed into my truth, which is a really nice feeling. And it's been quite a journey to get here. It's actually been a lot of ups and downs, including a near-death experience, and then a second health crisis, which led me to study functional medicine and nutrition and detoxification and all kinds of other things that have been a part of my journey, then yoga and meditation, then energy work. And all of it started with becoming a mother. And really the person that I was before that, which was at the age of 28, is very different than the person that I am now. And that's why I call it the rebirth. But I still notice that those old patterns show up sometimes. Really the old pattern of like wanting to prove myself or wanting to really just, do things and make the most of life. And it really comes back to just recognizing that those are old beliefs and old patterns of that feeling of not being worthy enough. And what's so interesting about my story is that becoming a mother is what changed everything for me. It was a near-death experience. I had pregnancy-induced liver failure. I was working corporate as an engineer in a very male-dominated environment. There were 3 women in a manufacturing plant of 200. I went to college with 7% women. So I really spent a lot of my life in a very masculine environment. And becoming a mother I just imagined it would be as easy as everything else. I thought, well, I'm like Superwoman. I can do this and I'm just going to do this and have a baby. And then it just didn't turn out that way. And my health was in crisis after that. And it was really just this realization that what you're here doing in this corporate world is not who you are. It has nothing to do with you, or it's not what you think it is. It isn't what matters. And, that was really the beginning of just this new pathway. And I don't know what's going to come up today, but there have been so many times where my life has just radically altered course because I allowed my children to be the teachers. And I think that has probably been my greatest and most challenging gift. And if there was one nugget of wisdom that I would want to leave today, it would be that. It would be that we are in a time of this collective rising, specifically around the healing of the feminine. And the children, all the children, actually, I'm noticing the boys and the girls are here supporting us in this. And if we just listen to what they're saying, if we really actually listen, and I'm noticing it's actually a very small percentage of parents that are listening, because we're so caught up. This has been the gift in the pandemic. We're so caught up in the busyness and the distraction of what we think we have to do. Our kids have to get good grades and they have to go to college and they have to, fill in the blank, right?
Right.
We're not even being in that, allowing that space of stillness of like what really, really matters. And if we actually slow down and listen from a very, very young age, our children are teaching us. And that has been my greatest gift. And it takes a huge act of surrender, which I think takes more courage to surrender and listen and allow your children to fully be who they are and not put our ego into it. And, I'll just say that it's been a journey of peeling the layers for many, 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 many years. Even when I thought I was a conscious parent, I was still had my ego in it, as in like their results and identity say something about me. And it's just not that. So They're our greatest teachers.
They are. And when you said that, I got goosebumps because I know I have brought that up multiple times. I was just talking to a dear friend the other day who has a 7-year-old who said to me, my daughter looked at me and said, Mom, you can take a day off. And I turned around later and went back to my friend and I said, just greatest invitation for you would be to let her teach you, even though she's in your eyes only 7. I said, I talk a lot about our teenagers teaching us, but let her teach you from the age of 7. She knows, and she's guiding you home to yourself. So I know we share that viewpoint that they are our teacher. I think you and I used to talk a lot about seeing ourselves in what they're reflecting back to us in the mirror. I always talk about my girls being my greatest mirror to the roles I play, the just the growth that I'm here to, the lessons that I'm here to learn, and the change that I am going to be able to process through, because they're seeing me as as my highest version of myself. And my daughters have always been really good at telling me when I'm not operating at the highest version of myself. And I have had to learn to slow down and really take that in and not see it as an attack on who I am in that moment. So what comes to mind for me is if you would be willing to share what takeaway of like the greatest lesson, whether both of your daughters, the same lesson, or if there were 2 separate lessons from each daughter that they have taught you thus far as a mom.
Yeah. Well, as I was hearing you speak, one thing that really came through for me is that I just wanted to bring awareness to the relationship that you've created with your daughters, to where they trust you enough to be honest with you. I think that that's amazing, right? Like it's so easy to be disconnected in today's world with social media and the cell phones and Netflix and all those things, that if to actually have that level of relationship where they feel comfortable speaking to you in that way is amazing. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. It felt really good to hear you say that. The biggest lesson, what was coming through when you were speaking is, it is everything. Like okay, so my oldest just turned 15, my youngest just turned 12. So it's the way that they choose to nourish themselves. It's the way that they value their health. It's the way that they talk to themselves about what they think they look like. It's the way that they allow themselves or give themselves permission to be present. It's the way that they or don't allow themselves to slow down. It's who they say yes to, what they say yes to, and what they don't. Like, I'm witnessing all of this right now, and I'm like, oh crap. Like, I just know, like, I'm hearing myself say stuff. And then as I think I'm providing a teaching moment, and as we all know, teaching is in the being, not the speaking, right? It's leading by the example. And I'm just noticing every little thing now. Okay, so my 15-year-old's getting her permit. We were just talking about how I'm not that great of a driver, and I'm not. Never have been. So it's every single thing. I'm like, oh God, like I really need to. This is my invitation to want to be a better driver, because now it really matters, because what I'm doing, she's going to pick up on. So it's really everything. And it's this balance of like, it's such an interesting, delicate balance, because at the same time, I love to teach personal self-responsibility, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm teaching her to be responsible for herself, but they're still looking at me to be their teacher. Mm-hmm. So the biggest lesson and takeaway is, and it might just be where I'm at right now, there's 2 of them. One is the power of surrender. It has really been what that whole near-death experience taught me when my daughter was born. It's been a constant invitation, is a good word, to practice the power of surrender. And maybe your listeners can relate to this. For someone like me, type A, recovering overachiever, perfectionist. Yes, I do like to be in control. I will admit it's an ego thing. I like to feel safe. It's coming out of a place of insecurity. It's unhealthy. Like, it's like flying, right? We've had this conversation. Like, I'm trusting the pilot to fly the airplane so much that I started to get my own pilot's license. Like, that's how much I'm like, I love to kind of know everything that's happening. So it's been a huge practice of surrender and trust. And this is pretty vulnerable to share. But I had this experience in 2014, and I've had many, many rebirth, reawakening experiences. To name a few, a Shakti awakening, soul retrieval, and all of these things came to me a couple past life regressions. All of these things that I've been led into were all led by my children. These are never things that I would have imagined I was doing, that I was listening and being guided. And I had a really bad day back in 2014, and I was raised Christian. So I got 2 flat tires. I burned my arm. It was just a frustrating day. So I went to the beach to meditate, and I had this experience where I went to the beach to meditate, and I kept trying to go to my happy place. And I kept going to the operating room when my daughter was born. So this was like 8 years after she was born. And this was, 8 years ago now. Seems like yesterday.
Wow. Yeah.
And I go to the beach and I'm meditating. I'm like, I want to go to my happy place. And it was like, boom, operating room, like happy place, operating room. Like, damn it, fine. I'm just going to surrender. And I had this image of Jesus at the foot of my bed. And he just said, you don't have to worry anymore. Like, I've got her. I've got her. And there must have been something about her that I was worried about at the time. And whatever that experience was, it felt like a huge weight was lifted off my shoulder. And I realized how much of keeping her safe I was making about me. It was like, she's my responsibility. And yes, she is, but she's really, and I know that there's people with all different beliefs that are going to be listening to this, but she's really a child of God. She's really her own person, and I'm just here to guide her. And I was making so much of her healing journey about me, because it led me to create this fulfilling career into health coaching, and then into yoga and meditation and life coaching. All of that was guided by the things that were really difficult, by that crisis that happened. And so I almost became too attached to my own personal transformation through motherhood, which was interesting. So it's really about, when I say surrender, I say letting go and just witnessing, letting your children be who they are, and not making it about us, even when they do really well and even when they are struggling. That would, I would say, be the number one takeaway. And the second one is just presence, like presence in every way. And when the place that I'm at right now is really, and I think this is the blessing of children, is that and we see this in younger children, but just joy in life. Like, I am in a place of really practicing, I should say, because I say no longer, but never say never, because I'm always just practicing. But really practicing, like, if I don't have joy in something, this includes a client that I might work with, or a person to collaborate with, or even a podcast to interview. If it's not feeling joyful, I just removed myself from a program that I signed up for this year, because I wasn't getting excited about it. And it was really hard for me to say no. Like, I love the idea of things, but just because I love the idea of things doesn't mean that it's serving me. And this was the first time that I was let go of my fear of letting somebody down, and backed out of something and asked for my money back, which was like a huge thing for me. But I really, again, the second takeaway is just the present moment. And the present moment is what I'm noticing is where we can find joy. So those are the two things. And actually, each of those things came from a different daughter. So surrender is the older daughter. The present moment and joy is my second daughter. Her love language is quality time. And the older one's love language is words of affirmations. You can kind of see how they show up is that reflection of you. And it helps to, it does help us to heal that part of us. And it's also the invitation and the opportunity to you know, I feel like open the path or the gateway for them to have their own experience and really to do generational healing together.
Yeah, it was actually, that was coming through for me, is like what the blessing is of breaking that generational pattern of not surrendering or not being present. And I know like what hit for me was, it actually brought tears to my eyes when Jesus came to you and said, you don't have to worry anymore. I have her. I have found that trust in they are mine in this family, but in the truth and the depth of who they are not mine. And the more I try to hold tight, which I firmly believe everybody I knew from like my generation, the mothers tried to hold tight. There was not a lot of loosening. There was not a lot of like, what's your life? What is going to make you happy? What do you want to do? There were a lot of just roles that were passed on, or of course you're going to go to college. Of course you're going to study this. And for me, it has been about coming back to they are their own people. I have to trust that we have raised them well and they are going to make good choices. But coming into your story about driving, teaching my daughter to drive was one of the most humbling, like our biggest fights. Here I was, the intuitive mother coach, having the podcast. Our biggest fights were during her time period of learning to drive. And I don't mean like fights where I just said one thing. I mean, I was full out screaming. I was like the mad woman and would bring her to tears. We would come home screaming at each other. And my husband would be like, oh my God. But the day she got her license was that time period was actually a major shift in our relationship, a major shift in my healing, and to notice the patterns that I was repeating, and a major shift when she had that license and she could leave the house for the first time, of trusting that I had done all I could do. My husband had done all he could do to make sure she was a good driver by our feeling, and that God had her. And that was all I could do. I was traumatized as a teenager with multiple tragic car accidents, taking the lives of teens that I knew. And so I could see that pattern repeating into the fear of me wanting to control. It doesn't mean I'm really great about like when she leaves, I'm like, text me when you're there. Text me when you're leaving for home. Yeah. And, sometimes I do find a friend. And I find her in path as to where she's going. And I'm learning. But really that trusting and believing that they're truly here, they're being held, their story is unfolding as it is supposed to. I have no control over that story, and accepting the acceptance of I have no control. I can do my best and I can show up as who I'm here to be and guide them and teach them, but it is really their life.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point. I love that you use the word acceptance, because it doesn't mean that we're comfortable with it or we like it, right? And thank you for sharing all that, because I'm approaching that 15-year mark, right? So just pray for me. But it's really what I really love that you shared, and what I think would be really valuable for the listeners to hear is that you're not an intuitive mother coach because this is easy for you. Like, we don't get to be life coaches because we got it all figured out. I mean, it's not that at all. It's that we've been willing to do the work, to lean in and be uncomfortable, and that we want to provide a space, give permission. Like, there's such grace and wisdom when you give women permission to share, like we're doing on this podcast, to come together in circles. And I know that you have a space for a circle that you hold for mothers to come together. It's interesting that we do it when our kids are younger. Like, there's moms groups when our kids are younger. we need a mom's group, which you're holding when our kids are teenagers, and workshops. And I know you had Chandra on the podcast, who's absolutely amazing. And I know I introduced her to you, and we've been talking, Chandra, if you're listening, Maiden Workshop, like for years, like how powerful it would be to give teenage girls the space to come together and to heal all the parts of themselves, but also their relationships with other women. Because you and I know, raising girls, how hard witnessing their relationships. You just talked about one of your daughters in a relationship that she had that transitioned, and how not being in school because it's the pandemic is making it harder to make new relationships. And I'd really love to see this. I'd love to see more space, because it's such a critical time, like age 12 to 16, really, for girls to come together and do some work with their mother, maybe with their sister, and with other girls. And we can do virtual retreats, but in-person retreats for that type of stuff would be super powerful. So I just wanted to say that I love that you shared that, you're an intuitive mother coach, and like, it's still really, really hard, because it gives permission for the listeners to know that this is just life. And what Angie and I do is that we witness ourselves when we lose our shit. Can I cuss on here?
Yes, you can.
We witness ourselves when we lose our crap. And then we are just in the practice of like, okay, I made a mistake. Take a deep breath. What was that about? So there's like, we turn a little bit and we're like, well, what is this here to teach me? Because there's some personal growth for me. Like, why am I still losing my crap? Oh, because I'm scared, because I remember all the friends that I've lost in car accidents. Me too. I think it was like, for me, I was around 22 people, like right after college, 22 friends within 2 years. It was insane.
Oh my gosh.
And I went to a college with mostly boys, and they were all, I don't know. So there was just something happening there. So it's like, okay, what is this here to teach me? Apologize, because you were.
Well, I was just going to say, right? the value of owning it.
The value of owning it.
Yeah.
Doing your own personal inner work, owning it, and then having a conversation with them later, like how was that for you? Because we try to rewrite those generational experiences and habits, but we're just doing it for the first time. And we're willing to shift the course, which is harder than just turning the head and just doing what we learned. And so, most importantly, having compassion for ourselves, for doing the best we can do. It's in that moment, you said, there's that moment where you're like, everything is like closing in on you. You're like, and then you just have that, you just take that breath, and you just, doesn't mean that you approve of it. Acceptance is different than approval, but you just be willing, have the willingness to trust, surrender, and accept the situation for what it is. And that means even accepting yourself for the way you showed up if it wasn't what you imagined. So thank you and I went off kind of on that, but I think the most important thing is to give the listeners permission to just have compassion for the mistakes.
Absolutely.
And acceptance of all of what we're experiencing.
Yes. And I think that comes up, like you said, that when kids are little, we're having play groups. And although I shared on a recent podcast, like I didn't feel my play groups when the kids were little, and the support systems were really being vulnerable. We were hiding some parts of ourselves. The true awakening in motherhood, my awakening started as a rebirth when I had a near-death experience as well. But I would say my true awakening in motherhood came at the teen years, where they were starting to reflect back to me, and it wasn't aligning with who I wanted to be. And I will be honest, for years, I was holding the shame and the guilt of that. And then it was just this past December that, I will be honest, I was asked by my daughter's therapist if I would attend a therapy session. And I said to her, well, with my husband, right? And, let me make sure we're scheduling a good time for him. And she was like, no, just you. And on the way home, I looked at my daughter, who had been in her therapy appointment, and I had gone to pick her up, and that's when this conversation went on. And I said to her, it just confuses me why Dad doesn't need to be there. I said, we're both your parents. And she looked at me and said, because my anxiety comes from you. I don't know. I was like between screaming, crying, holding it in. Let me just get in the house. Silent the whole way home, like, which she recognized, and it bothered her. Like, she thought I was going to lose my shit. And I had to sit in it and really dig into what was coming up. Like, what was I really afraid of? What was I afraid my daughter had told the therapist? What was I afraid the therapist was judging me for? And when we had that appointment, it was amazing. And afterwards, I was talking with a really good friend, and she said to me, I'm going to invite you to forgive yourself. Like, you did all that you knew. That was, you were showing up as you knew, and the value comes in that you're now choosing to show up differently. Your daughter will remember that, even if right now what she remembers is the anxiety you caused. And there's so much value in just being real, showing up, being vulnerable, owning. I mean, I went into that appointment and I owned, yes, I caused traumatic anxiety, and I know where it came from, and I know why, and I am doing the work. But I will own that her anxiety has come from me. And there was just so much value in being real and honest. And I think I talked about it in a previous podcast. Like, I am never going to show up and say this is easy. I feel like every stage just pulls back another layer. And each of my daughters, as I'm sure you have experienced, they both come with the different layer they're peeling back. It's just, one has a boyfriend since she's been, my gosh, was she 14 or 14? 14. They're still together. So her dad and I were high school sweethearts as well. So it's interesting to see that layer play out and start to recognize things that my mom probably felt and how I want to handle them differently. And then, there's our other daughter who struggles with body image and self-confidence. And I spoke to someone and they said to me, I invite you to lean into your own feelings about your body. And I was like, oh, my feelings about my body are perfect. And the next week, something happened that I was like, oh, all right, yeah, no, my feelings about my body are not perfect. And I probably need to lean on in there. So it is. It's just such without my daughters, I say all the time, like, where would the lessons have come from? Like, for me, this was my greatest wish, was to become a mom. And I used to think that was so little compared to people that I knew that said, oh, I wanted to be a teacher, a nurse, a doctor, or whatever. And I just look at them and think this was in motherhood. They are our greatest teachers. There's so much growth in motherhood, and to show up and be vulnerable and be filled with compassion, because you're going to make choices that do not necessarily do the best thing for them. But then if you can show up in that and own it. And I know when you and I worked together, there was so much of that work that, you even helped me to start to see within my relationships with my daughters. So,
yeah. Wow, that was such a powerful share. Thank you for just being so open and vulnerable about that. And I think, there's even an opportunity to witness the belief that all of my greatest gifts have come from being a mother. Like, everything that we say, there's always an invitation to lean in. And it's not making it right or wrong. It's just like being curious, like realizing that it's of such high value to you, and then finding that right relationship. I've always talked about how everything is a co-creation and a relationship. So when I hear you speak about what your daughter said to you, there's also this part of me that, on the other hand, sees, well, there's a part of her soul that agreed to co-create that with you, because there's some healing that's coming for her, which is totally different than what's happening for you.
Absolutely.
And how easily we as the parents make ourselves wrong. Like, this is what we do. We go immediately into our guilt and our shame because we care so much. And thank you for sharing that, because I know that happens for a lot of moms, because we really do care. We really do want to do a good job. But the truth is that we don't always know how, and that is okay too, because like, to come full circle, it's all about trust and surrender, trusting that whatever it is that your daughter needed to learn from this experience, witnessing her, and she may not have it all figured out yet, or she may not understand it, but at some point in time in her life, she's going to realize that she's going to be learning from it. I just had a discovery yesterday from my women's group coaching. There was one of the women who we were just sharing about receiving. And I talk a lot about the importance of receiving in order to just be and show up and feel fulfilled, receiving nourishment from food, receiving currency, money for the work that we do, receiving drinking water, receiving like the flow of music through dance, or whatever it is, receiving love and intimacy in our marriage. And, I don't know if this is mostly a generational thing, but like, my mom wasn't super big on affection. And so I witness myself showing up differently with my kids. Like, I'm very affectionate with my kids, but not always with my husband, and realizing that sometimes when I'm in overwhelm, and this feels vulnerable to share, that like, I withhold physical affection because I'm feeling an overwhelm. And I went over to my mom's house the other night and I witnessed the same thing. So this is multi-generational. Like, we can witness ourselves as daughters and then as mothers and see how we do it differently. And when we can stop making ourselves wrong and stop being in that guilt and shame is a very low vibration, energetic frequency. But when we can do that, then we can see a lot more, because we're not in the emotion of it. And I think that's what I want the listeners to hear, is like, it doesn't even really matter if it was right or wrong. Like your friend said, you were doing the best you could do, and that's all we're doing. But if we kind of give space a little bit, we can see more. And I feel like we can create the space to allow the healing to happen. Like, we don't always have to seek it outside of ourselves, but we can just practice in that moment, witnessing, and notice when you feel that trigger, which I like to call an activation, because I feel like a trigger is very trauma response related. And if we've been doing the self-work, if you've been in therapy or you've had a coach, then you've probably worked through a lot of your trauma, or you're working through it. But if you haven't done any work at all, then the trauma is still probably present. But then it gets to a place where it's not really a trigger, it's an activation, which is really inviting you to make a different choice. So yeah, I love that you shared all of that it's a co-creation.
Yeah, I love that you shared like what you witnessed with your mom when you were over at her house. And the one thing that I often say, and I remember saying to myself at that time period where Caroline was sharing with me things that I had done that had upset her, was that I remember saying to her, you chose me in this lifetime to learn and grow and be who you are going to be. And that means that the lessons are going to come through multitudes of people, but I am one of those lessons. and I even said to Chandra, like, that helps me sleep at night, is to know that, like, yeah, but you chose me. We are in this, like, our souls are in this lifetime together to grow together. And that daughter in particular of mine is a firm believer in past lives and souls growing together and meeting up again in other lives. And I said to her, and then I wrapped it up, that conversation, with like, if I am what I believe to be the generational breaker, like I'm breaking some generational patterns, you are actually, you and your sister are actually the ones that are going to be the generational, like, change maker. Like, you're going to take it forward to the next level, and that this is all our souls together working. Because I see what came before, and now you're old enough to even witness what came before, or whatever. They witness the grandparents, the great grandparents. They remember things about that and how it played into life. They laugh at stories that I tell them. But you will be the generational change maker, as I am the change breaker, right here, saying this is enough. Like, we're not going to carry this on. And you've actually been one of the teachers to teach me this is not going to carry on. I don't want this to continue. So I really appreciated you sharing just, what you see when it's such a big part of our lives, is the generational patterning that follows us. And we don't, for a while, I didn't think about that when I was younger. I always just accepted, I am just like my grandmother who had anxiety, who had this, never realized I had the capacity to change and heal that and go forward.
That's a powerful share, because I talk about like the 5 most common limiting beliefs that are subconscious that we're not aware of. And one of them is not, I don't want to say like hopelessness, but this sense of like, well, we are this way just because our family is this way. And our generation specifically in the collective right now, I mean, we're quite honestly, and I want to get into the intuitive piece of this because I think it's really important about the work that you do and the listeners that this show is going to attract, and how our children are reminding us that intuition is very a natural part of who we are. But collectively, we are in a time period right now, the 9th wave of creation. Energetically, everything is, I mean, you hear people talking about from 3D to 5D, and that is already happening. People are having extremely different realities right now. And I'm guessing that many of the listeners on this podcast, because of the name of it, have some sense of awareness that we are not just a physical being, that we have energy, emotional, mental bodies that make up us, our wholeness. And we're talking about past lives. And I have my daughters have each been in a past life. And the crazy thing is that I would have never believed this stuff, except that I listened. And then on each past life regression that I did where my daughter showed up, one where my oldest was my mother, at a very young age, I'm talking like 8 and 7, they would confirm that day, writing me notes. And I was like, this can't be true. Like, that was just a coincidence. But at a very young age, like literally God was I said, well, if this is true, send me a message. And then my daughter wrote me a message. You have been the greatest. I mean, I have it still in my computer. You've been the greatest presence in all of my lives, like an angel in this life and the last, or something. Like, it didn't even, I was like, what are you talking about? We've never even talked about past lives. And then my other daughter, the day I did the past life regression where she showed up, started talking about, what happens when we die? Have we ever been together? Can I come back as a dolphin? I think we've been together before. She was like 6 or 7.
Wow.
So like, and I've documented all of this because it's almost too hard to believe sometimes. And then I'm like, wait a minute, that's a belief that it's too hard to believe. And that's what I want to move into as we come to a close on the podcast, is the intuitive piece, because we're in a place in the collective right now where we're invited to shift. And those of us that have said yes, like you and I as mothers, who have been willing to listen, who are willing to allow our children to guide us. And when we say this, there's a healthy boundary there. We're not saying like we let them teach us do everything. No, we hold the sacred space, the container, but we listen with healthy discernment as to what they're here to do and how it's playing a role for us. And then we witness them in what they're doing and how we play a role in their experience. And that's a practice. But in the collective right now, people are having extremely different realities. And the reality of it is that we get to choose our experience. And some people are going to choose to stay stuck in the 3D, the physical. The 3D is the physical. They're going to experience a lot of fear and suffering. A lot of them will, and I'm being super radically honest right now. This is a lot of what I've been it's what I've been downloading, but like, this is just the reality of it. And it's okay. Cause it's like a chess game. Like everybody wants to have the queen, but nobody wants the pawn, but the pawn has a role too. And so people are going to experience suffering, and they're going to, because that's just what they're here to do in this experience. And some people are going to not choose that, and they're going to choose to be feeling a lot of, I say like wealth, WELLTH, because this pandemic is very much about our relationship with our physical body, but abundance in love and nourishment and currency and energy and expansion and growth. And this isn't about, it's a little bit about, I don't want to hesitate to say self-mastery, because it's really in the surrender of it all. So there's a balance there. But to get to the intuitive piece, one of the greatest gifts that our children can give us is that we realize that when they come into this life, they are so connected. My daughter used to say things at a very young age. I was like, what is she talking about? Well, I had no idea she could experience the fifth dimension in this reality until I kept listening, and she would tell me about my grandmother who she never met. She could even tell me her name that she didn't know. She's never met her. I wasn't close to her. They lived in California. I never lived close to her. A lot of families live close to each other. We did not. She would tell me about her personality. She was right on. She would tell me about my guides and their names. And then I would hear it from the same thing from multiple spiritual people that I was working with that were channeling, same name. It just came up again. One of my guides' name is Lily. And so a lot of times they'll be, I see all these like flowers. And so, but my daughter at the age of like 5 and 6 was saying this, and we didn't talk about this. This would just come up. And she would say things to me. She would say things to me about how she was worried about the world and what was going to happen in the world, and how she used to say things like, it's going to be overrun with technology and machines and people are going to get very sick. And she would say all these things. And so what I want to say is, I'm an intuitive healer, and intuition is very normal. It's not some sci-fi thing. It's not even spiritual. It's actually, there's a lot of science behind it. It's actually who we are. And children come in with all of this awareness, and then they shut it down because it's a lot to take in. It's a lot to take in as an empath, as an intuitive. And I'm saying this because for parents listening, if you have younger children specifically, I want to invite you to witness your children in this. And then one of the best gifts you can give them is to help them to manage this, to help them to realize that it's normal, and not to completely shut it down. They might need to shut it down for a little bit because it might be overwhelming, like in middle school. Or, like at a time right now, we were on the verge of an energetic crisis right before the pandemic, because my daughter knew something was coming. As soon as the pandemic hit, all of that went away. She refuses to have a cell phone. She's 15. And just because, well, she lives in the world of energy, but the invitation is to invite the mothers of this podcast to realize that if they really start to listen and slow down and witness these things in their children, and just listen to what they're saying and not make it weird, or there's also a wounding in the church around this. And so, my daughter went to a Christian school for a little bit. She came home one day and said, how come like we talk about angels in the Bible, but then we're not allowed to talk about it or see them? Like we're not supposed to, or like, she's like, it doesn't make sense. Start listening to those things and realize what our own conditioning has been. When we listen to their questions, it makes us realize our conditioning and our beliefs. And when it comes to the intuitive piece, it, like me witnessing my children and how intuitive. I have one who's very clairvoyant. The other one's very clairsentient, empathic. She talks to animals and dragons. And, but really, I'm serious. Like there is this other dimension, and when we notice that, we realize that was within us all along, and that we shut it down at some point in time. Then we can actually even see that it was in our mothers, in our grandmothers, and we can witness that they've shut it down. Like I can witness in my own mother that one of the reasons that she's an extreme empath and doesn't know it. So that's one of the reasons she wasn't very affectionate, because it was too vulnerable for her. And, just start witnessing and then, like you said, choosing differently. So not only in the parenting and the wounding part, we've talked about this before, not to parent from your wounds, but to parent from your gifts. So we get to learn from our wounds, and then hopefully we do the inner work so we don't project them onto our children, but we will. And then we just, forgive ourselves and have compassion and have a conversation about it. But to remember that we can also choose to parent from our gifts. And that is a way to empower our children and give them permission just to really be who they are. So coming full circle, I know we have a few more minutes, but that's kind of what I wanted to end on. And I know that it's something that you've always role modeled, and you're such a great role model in how you've allowed yes, I'm sure you've contributed to some of their anxiety, of course, because you cared, and you're learning and you're practicing, and, and I know I hold that same space that you do. Multiple times my daughters reminded me. And at the same time, I'm just telling her, I'm doing the best I can do, and we're breaking this, and, I want differently for you. I even said the other day, caught myself, I have my younger daughter wants to be a professional surfer, and she is certainly on her way if she wants to be. She's going to be sponsored soon. She's on the junior Olympic developmental team. And I said, well, school, she's like, I just want to move to Hawaii and surf. And she's straight A student. I'm like, well, school is important to get a job, and you might want to hold save room for college. And she just laughed at me. And I was like, well, you could do it online or whatever. I don't know what her future is going to be.
Yeah.
But it was just, she just kind of laughed, okay, because I said something well, you might want to save room for college so that you can have a good job. And she's
yeah. I'm not going to need that, Mom.
Yeah, maybe I'm wrong. If you can get paid to surf, why wouldn't you just do that?
It sounds like the similar conversations between our young guest, who's the musician, who's I may, we'll move to Nashville, but I may not go to college because my goal is really,
honestly.
So you know what? Let them.
Yeah. The truth is that
they know, and it's their path. And again, somebody said to me, our oldest is looking at Florida for college. I talked to you about that. You're in Florida. I'm up here in Pennsylvania, and it's scary, totally out of my control. And I think people used to think well, of course it's in your control. Just tell her she can't go. And I was absolutely not. I was if she chooses to go and something doesn't work out, that's her lesson. That's hers she has to be given the opportunity to go and see. And her heart. I think this would be a great way to pull this all full circle. I believe when you and I were working together, the one thing you really taught me was to fall into my body and my heart when I tend to overthink and my mind goes everywhere, but to fall into my heart. And it was a great tool for how I was feeling, but also to guide my daughters. If your heart is showing you those desires, then I certainly have no control to shift them. And I might be your mom, but that mom doesn't overweigh heart at all. And you taught me that your podcast is the Embodied Healing Self podcast. We talked so much about embodiment when I worked with you. You are so gifted at pulling those you work with into how they're feeling. I tell people all the time, I had become so disconnected from feeling that I didn't even know how to name a feeling. But working and getting to know you and listening to your podcast had certainly brought me home to that. And it has been something that I have relayed on to my daughters. I think I was doing some of that. I just didn't realize, and I wasn't really trusting my heart, but trusting their heart. They always know. And if they make the wrong choice, their soul knows the path to their greatest awakening. So if that means not going to college and you go down and surf, or not going to college and you try your hand for 10 years at musician in Nashville, which is going to be daunting, that's your path. That's how the soul knows it's your best path home. Yeah. My gosh. I love that. I love talking with you. Yeah. I love
Thank you.
Getting to chat with somebody who mothers from that same place, and somebody I have learned so much from myself as I have mothered. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I am receiving all that you just said. And in fact, it's what I've created is a body wisdom coaching certification. So it's intuition, but using somatic methods in the body, because a lot of intuitives are they're still very up in the top chakras. And so embodiment is really about bringing that consciousness, that higher self consciousness, all the way down into the root chakra, and actually being that energy, not just teaching it or talking about it or even seeing it, but actually fully embodying it. And that is really vulnerable, because when you get to the sacral chakra, that's where we receive. That's also healing the feminine. So that's what I realized, because I know you were in an intuitive coaching program where I was teaching a different style of intuitive coaching. And what I really realized is that for what I'm here to teach is more of the body wisdom and the embodiment of it. It's fully receiving that experience in the human body. So I'm receiving those kind words that you said. And I just want to reflect back to you as we close that all of those kind words that you said about me are a reflection of you. And you are such a wise and wonderful teacher when it comes to motherhood, that I've really enjoyed listening to what you have to share. And my girls are a couple of years behind you. So I just want to say that I do listen, and I do hear, and I am watching, and I'm listening to your shares, because you have so much wisdom in this particular area, and your heart is really in it. And so I'm so happy to see that you're creating the space for mothers to come together and giving them permission to share this, not only for you to be seen, but for them to be seen and held in this, because it really matters, and it matters more than it ever has, because of where we are collectively in healing the feminine. And this is a really hard truth that I want people to really hear and receive. It matters more than it ever has. Not that, well, and I want to say mothers of sons matter too, because healthy masculine, I'm recording a podcast about that today, is the healing of the feminine too. So it all comes together. So it's been a pleasure being a guest on your show.
Have you.
And I know we could talk for another hour.
Keep going. I know, but another time, I'm sure I'll have you back at some point down the road or whatever. Yeah. All right.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for joining. And it will be in the show notes where to find you for anybody who wants to listen in. I will tag in your podcast and all of that so that they can find you.
Awesome. Thanks so much,
Thank
Angie.
you. Have a good day.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.
Hey friends, thanks for joining me on this week's episode of the Intuitive Mother podcast. I am so deeply grateful for each and every one of you that has listened in, whether it's your 50th episode or first episode. You taking the time to share this sacred space with me means the world to me and warms my heart. Of course, I would love to hear from each and every one of you about what interviews you loved and what you want to hear more of. Drop me a line at Angie@angieschaefer.com. On my website, you can also learn more about the programs that I'm offering and the coaching and healings that are also available for each one of you as you journey home to your sacred self. I am thankful for you spending your time with me, and I cannot wait to share another episode with you next week. Have a great day.